Welcome to the next edition of Community Dialogues podcast. And today we have a very well known in the space of communications, corporate communication, and especially internal communications. Please welcome Aniisu. Aniisu is a veteran in the communications industry. He started India's first blog on internal communications, Intrascope. And by the way, he still updates it regularly. You can find a lot of great tips from there. He shares tips, practices, and insights with practitioners. Professionally, he identifies himself as an internal communicator, change leader, Prosky certified change management practitioner, storyteller, employee advocacy champion with great experience in global capability centers experience. He is right now based out of Australia, right, Aniisu?
Yeah, based in Sydney.
And he has authored 3 books, latest being Inclusive Internal Communications in 2023, Get Intentional in 2021, and Internal Communications Insights, Practices, and Models in 2012. He believes organizations aren't just faceless entities, they are made of individuals, each with their own unique personal brand. So thank you so much, Aniisu, for joining on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to sharing some great insights and learning from you for all the years you have spent in the internal communication industry, from the when internal communication wasn't even a word in India. I think you have been there since then. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for Ambuj. I think I've been following your work as well, and I'm pretty, delighted to know that you've also been in this practice. You have done a lot of great work, and you started your own, organization and your consulting. So very impressed by the journey you have taken. So I'm very delighted to be part of this show and podcast that you host. Happy to engage and have a good conversation.
Looking forward. So, because this podcast is about you, so let's start with your experience in the domain. Like you have been in the domain for 2 decades, one of the first IC practitioners in India. How do you see the domain has evolved over the years?
It's a great question, Ambuj, because like you rightly pointed out, when I started way back, 2 decades ago, internal communications in India was very nascent. People really never understood it, and there weren't many roles in the space. So I think by getting into that domain early, I was able to understand it and establish myself. The way I see it is today's world, I think it's become much more vital to the organization's success. And it's also transformed from being a nice to have to being a must have function. I think that's been one of the transitions and changes I've seen. I've also seen that it's a transformative domain and which brings about change in the organization and drives employee experience. So it's really not only about passing information between different functions in the organization. I also see the fact that it's very closely linked to the executive team and influences decisions beyond just communication. So I think the communicators play a big role in influencing culture, purpose, diversity, inclusion, equity, involvement, all of those aspects as well. So it's become even more valuable, especially after COVID-19. And like most organizations, got started on their digital journey and realized how valuable and how important it is to keep employees connected to the purpose on the same page, and also getting them to go over and above at the workplace. So I think these are broadly the changes I've seen over the last few decades here.
So, Anisu, one of the best things about your experience is that you have exposure to international and Indian landscape in internal communications as well. How do you see the two different? Like so that's the first question. I'll introduce another question over time after you.
Sure. Okay. I think that's a good question because I have had the opportunity, and I think I'm also fortunate and blessed to have that opportunity to work not just in India, but also in the UK, in Poland, and now in Australia. So let me address the similarities by first saying that it's about the why. I think that's really where the similarities are, as in the principles and mechanisms of internal communications stays the same irrespective of where it is practiced, and irrespective of how big or large or small the organization is and where it is located. So I think that is fundamentally the similarity, and also important to know that communicating with clarity, with consistency, and in a timely manner is expected to be the same irrespective of where you are. Also, a lot of the channels which are used, be it online platforms, emails, town halls, manager meets, feedback sessions, all these are common ways of engaging and communicating with people. I think the difference comes when you bring in about the where, how, what, and when. And again,
Mhm.
abroad based on the cultural nuances and the fact that you need to understand that the appetite for information, the ways people absorb information, the trust levels, the hierarchies at play, the culture within the firm, how open the leadership is to engaging. Also, where does internal communication sit as a function, and what are the kind of influences it has on the decisions to communicate? So I think the differences play out in that aspect. From Yeah, you had some other question beyond that.
Yeah. So the other question is, so the question is that, so is it something that the internal communications professionals and teams in India can learn from practices abroad, or the teams and people outside India, what they can learn from the practices in India?
Yeah, I think there's obviously it's a two-way street, and I would think India has a lot to offer, especially a lot of lessons. Firstly, I would say the scale of operations makes it an opportunity for communicators to think differently and act differently in the market. So, for example, there are companies in India which have way over 350,000 employees in one place, making it often a challenge where
Mhm.
where when to communicate, how to communicate, and something which even the rest of the world probably can't comprehend, how Indian internal communicators manage all of that. The second, I would think, is the diversity of needs, aspirations, and interests, and the huge demographic dividend that India has, especially with the youngsters, Gen Z at the workplace, making India again a great place to practice a lot of great internal communications. So there is a lot. There's a lot to experiment, a lot to learn, a lot to absorb while engaging locally. The third aspect I would say is more about the resilience of the people and communicators, because you have to manage through not so great public infrastructure, for example, the roads, the transport, people get ferried between
Mhm.
offices and homes and vice versa, and other basic amenities which most of the Western world takes for granted, making, because it's also an interesting challenge to engage while trying to communicate with staff when they are on the move. And so this agility and this rigor, which Indian internal communicators are able to do, is really unmatched, and I don't think anyone else around the world can do it. Now, on the other hand, I think India can definitely learn from the rest of the world, because the first aspect I would say is that we need to learn to do more with less, and that is a practice which is often revered in the Western world. Also, saying more with less is again expected. So that is one aspect. The second is, investing more in the training and development of internal communication teams and practitioners, even at the university level. And I think the Western world has invested a lot there, and I think we have an opportunity in that space. Overseas, I think there are dedicated courses. People with certifications are more often hired in such roles. And I've seen that a lot of organizations, be it Indian or multinational, who have operations, they train and coach their internal communication teams on trends, insights that will help improve the deliveries. Of course, some of it happens pretty organically. Some of it happens with focused interventions and training. So this leads to better respect and accountability for the function. And the third aspect I would say is more about the focus on empathy. There's an increased focus on empathy, values, assertiveness while communicating with stakeholders, which I don't think we do as much probably in India, and maybe that's again an area of improvement and an area of getting better at. And being able to take a stand and sticking to it, something which I've seen practiced very well overseas. So I think these are really the differences I see. So obviously, there's a lot of great positives about how Indian internal communicators practice, and there's a lot which we can learn from the Western world.
Wow. I think so many very nuanced points that you have pointed out in terms of what we can learn from each other. A very interesting point that, so when you say taking a stand, it's come as a very highlighting point right now as a last point. What do you think that actually what do Indian professionals need to learn on that aspect? Is it part of the culture? What is it that they have to unlearn to actually make that happen? Because that's a very
But
important point. You are dealing with CSU, CEOs, C-suits, CXOs, and
right,
there are very decisive roles. You are in a very decisive function as well, which is decisive if you take it that way, because it influences the entire organization. As I also say that nobody has a responsibility. Only two people in the organization think for the entire organization. One is the CEO and one is the internal comms. Everybody
right.
has their own then function. So these are the only two people who have the responsibility thing about the entire organization. And that is where taking a stand, it becomes a very big thing. And what do you think actually we Indian professionals need to learn from there?
I think that's it's a valid point. So when I say taking a stand, it's really about a being able to say no and
Yes.
being and able to say no assertively, and yet being amicable in taking the executive or the leadership along the journey. I think the fact that, and this obviously comes by a lot of skill and experience and expertise, because if you don't have credibility within the organization as a communicator, and that credibility comes with the work that you do, showing consistent, excellence over time, and that will build trust among the stakeholders. That's when you can really stand up and say no to certain things, because it's not because you don't want to do it, because you believe it's not the right approach, and then
Hmm.
offering solutions and different ways and approaches which will help guide the organization or the leadership team to do it the best way. So that's really what I mean by taking a stand, and I think I've seen this practiced quite effectively overseas, and I think there is definitely opportunities for us to learn from that.
We'll come back to this. I think this is something, this onion. I think we can peel, and there's a lot for all of us to learn. Because I have also certain understanding. I have also observation, especially in this context in India. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And I think moving on to the organizational and what internal comms really meant for. There's often a question, and I think it has affected all of us. It's going to affect all of us. This decade,
Mhm,
since the start of it, has been turbulent.
mhm.
There's a lot of flux. You had COVID the moment you entered the decade, you had COVID, and after that, you have wars. They don't seem to be kind of dying down. There's a lot of flux. And at the same time, you have technology advancements happening all across. AI is coming in. With so much of
Right.
flux, what does it mean for the IC functions across organizations?
You're right. So let me also add a bit more color to what you kind of just talked about. So one is on a macroeconomic level, there is business
Hmm.
upheavals, like you said. There are changes to working conditions. There are different and newer expectations from employees. And I think these are some of the biggest changes we see. Then, like you said, on the political side, we have political environments which bring about even greater challenges with polarization at the workplace. And to top it all, we even have diversity and inclusion issues where organizations are trying to grapple with, especially about integrating, the LGBTIQ and other displaced or disadvantaged communities into the workplace. So for the internal communication function, I think it means a few things. So firstly, I think it's more about how do there is an increased need for the leaders and function to look beyond the basics of, say, content, channels, and delivery. They need to be immersed in what is happening in their local communities, as well as trying to make sense of the worldviews and trying to shape that. So that's one aspect. The second is they need to also be listening more closely to employees and understanding their aspirations better to craft more personalized and more targeted and relevant communication. The third angle I would say is that they must work with leaders. And again, I'm talking of internal communicators. They need to work with leaders and influence them to have a point of view on each of these topics, which may be
Hmm.
of concern to the public. So it could be about, wage. It could be about, the diversity and inclusion issues. It could be about, political, chaos which is happening. But because employees are also what makes up part of the public, and therefore they are definitely influencing in their own way through social media. And therefore, if we don't have
Yes,
a say in
yes.
it, we are missing out the opportunity. And the last point I would like to say is that they also need to work with managers and leaders to be able to communicate these points of views more consistently. And this requires training and coaching. And again, this is an opportunity For example, you and I both can definitely contribute in such spaces, which unfortunately I don't think a lot of organizations invest because until it becomes a crisis and then they react to it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, these are broadly the areas which I think require attention.
Sure. Uh, Now the next actually, when the world is in flux, of course, it affects everything. There are a lot of cost cuts we are seeing across many companies in the world. There are people getting laid off. So also the companies are going to go under financial stress in the coming time. How do you see that impacting the comms function?
Right. So I think cost cutting has always been there in industries, and the idea is that businesses want to stay profitable and afloat and improve their bottom line. So that's never going to go away. So I don't think we should be looking at that and reacting. But the onus is on the communication functions to demonstrate straight that they are not really cost centers, but they are value adders and show ROI for their work. And that is, important because for example, research says that a significant improvement in communication effectiveness has almost a 30% improvement in the organization's value, and there is it's proven
Hmm.
research. Now, this kind of data is something which communicators should be able to leverage and influence their business leaders to understand how they add value to the organization. These functions also need to reinvent themselves to be business players and not just support agents who are just trying to enable the business. So that is again a fundamental shift that needs to happen, which means they need to understand the business more. They need to know how it makes money. They need to know how it can make the business more visible, and also make it more relevant through the eyes of employees as well as the work of the leaders. So the focus should be more on showcasing the risks of not investing in communications. What will happen
Hmm.
if you don't have a communication or internal communication team? You will have a high cost of rehiring. You will have low engagement. You'll
Yeah.
have increased resentment, among employees, lower productivity, risk of data and information loss. Competition will take away talent. So there are a lot of risks, and if the business leaders are made aware of these risks, they will start opening their minds and then thinking of the function differently. So convincing leaders also means the communication function needs to work like a agency, I would say, with a very clear narrative and a pitch on the offer and the value they are
Hmm.
making. And this leads to the metrics side of it. So you need to demonstrate with metrics that you are moving the needle, making change, making a huge impact to the business. So I think that's fundamentally how it can be improved.
Now that you have mentioned metrics, I think that's a crucial question that is being asked from IC professionals in India, and I'm sure in abroad as well. Are there any differentiating practices across in the foreign markets? If so, could you please put a light on that? And also, what is your take on how's the experience with the entire measurement practice in internal comms? Have you been able to crack this code? Or how this worked for you? How has it worked for you?
So yeah, I think it's a good question. I think measurement has always been an important aspect to
Yeah.
influence leaders, but I believe measurement is a mindset. And if business leaders were not measured, say for example, on their performance, they would really not be acting, swiftly on business outcomes. So they would be also relaxed about it. So just because the board is very laser focused on these numbers, so therefore the CEO and the CXO and others are all paying attention to it. So likewise, I think there needs to be a stronger focus on measurement. And this really works for the communication measurement as well. So I've seen a lot of organizations where measurement was never given it attention. And you could clearly see a drop in the quality, the value add, the maturity, and the timeliness, and all these things suffer. Now, when organizations paid attention, the results were extreme, really, really high. So, one organization I know even measured the cost per employee and the productivity. So, the emphasis was more on the time and effort. And in other case, when they looked at the business outcomes, the communication functions were on the toes to deliver results. So, it doesn't mean that the internal comms leader needs to wait to be called out and then start focusing on measurement. They can take ownership right away and get a seat at the table by showcasing they can measure their own work and link it to the organizational goals. Often they feel it is a bit of wishy-washy, high level, and not really related to the role. But unless this is closely looked at and the measures are refined, you will never really get far. So the basic level I would say is to look at the input versus output. Of course, and that's really most of the internal communicators do. They have invested in infrastructure, be it an online platform or the teams. You have maybe 3 members, 5 members, and then there's a cost associated with it. And then you look at the output. Did you deliver on time? Did you stick to the standards? Did the number of assets created, were they required by the business, and were they useful? Then you have measuring the open rates, read rates, all of that, and that actually doesn't mean a lot to the business. The next level is to link it to the performance, and I think that's where it gets meaningful for the business. So did you do a baseline on how people are currently perceiving or engaging with communications? Have you moved the needle on it? Did people stay back because of how you communicated? Did they have a positive view of the business and leaders? Now, when you start measuring some of this, that's when leaders open their eyes and say, okay, this makes sense for us. So I think the key point is you need to take it up a notch when you're measuring. So even managers and how they communicate should be measured, and the way they engage with internal comms should be measured. And internal communications is not really about the function, it is more about the functional's ability to make business succeed. I think that's very crucial. So when leaders see that they are the face of communications, and that's when it gets very interesting and eye-opening for them. Till then, it becomes something that a function is doing somewhere and it's really not related to them. It becomes a lot more personal when they are starting they
Yes.
get measured on internal communications. So I remember an interesting example where at one of my previous workplaces, we were measuring the open rates and read rates of emails and all of that. But and then at some point we realized that some of the teams were not opening their emails, some of them are not reading, and then what we did was we analyzed it and we wanted to go and check by business. And then we realized, and when we started extrapolating the data, we were able to connect the dots and see that the teams which are not opening their data or their emails were the ones which are not engaged enough when you looked at the engagement scores. So when we brought this data to the managers and to the broader leadership team, that's when it opened the eyes. And then they started challenging the managers, asking them why were their teams not reading their mails. So the shift happened immediately there, and it wasn't really about the
Wow.
comms function. It was more about the managers taking ownership of, if your teams are not reading, obviously they are not understanding what the business is doing. Obviously they're not engaged. So there's a clear correlation. So I think it requires the team to be a bit more courageous, because we had to then influence the CEO to bring this up at a managers meeting, and that really changed the dynamic. So it's really about being a bit astute about how you do this, but the idea is that you need to tread carefully when you bring measurement into the picture.
Sure. I think I'll take the question after this question first, because that's very
Mhm.
interesting. You brought in the angle of engaging leadership. Now, actually, let's kind of broaden it a little. And
Mhm.
in one of your podcasts, you said employees are smart, talented, and know more about comms than comms professionals do. And I think that's a beautiful line. And how do you make, and so now linking that aspect, that engage leaders so that they know more, linking that with the people now. So
Mhm.
I think there's a great insight that if you involve people, it will be more effective, and it will be actually the measurability also can be enhanced that way. So what is your take on that? What do you
Uh,
mean by that?
Absolutely. No, and I think this concept and this thought is articulated in my most recent book, Inclusive Internal Communications. The way traditionally organizations have viewed employees, they've seen them as an audience, and over the years they have soon realized that listening, asking questions, involving, collaborating with them has given them a lot more outcomes and better results. And that's why we now see a lot more organizations running innovation and idea harvesting contests, and getting people involved in the journey of the organization. And we also know how, for example, Google has taken employees' ideas and converted them into global products we use today. So
Mm.
therefore, the thought of involving employees in communications and in generally in how the organization functions is very, very vital. So they have great ideas. They see different perspectives that we can't. And if there is trust within the organization, they will also tell you the truth. And that's really what we need to hear, because often leaders are caught in this echo chamber of theirs, where they don't really want to hear what everyone else is saying, but they just hear what people around them are telling them. So how organizations have been really hesitant to leverage their employees, because there's a sense of fear that involving employees might mean that they would start looking weak. or there is a sense of arrogance saying that leaders know best, and therefore why should we even involve employees? And there is also thinking that employees are lower in the lower in the hierarchy, and what they can know about the business of communication, I mean, they probably don't know enough. And the fourth aspect would be a belief that they would lose control. So if we would start involving employees, then you would lose control over, say, access to information, which will make their jobs redundant. There is the unwillingness of the organization to experiment, and I think when we hire experts to do work, we think that they are only meant to do that particular work. So, for example, if you're hiring a technologist, you think the technologist is coming and doing coding and nothing else. But what we are missing out is they are not bringing their whole self to the workplace. We are not able to harness the talent and potential that they have, and that's what's missing out. So I think, therefore, to involve employees without letting go of control, having an open mind and willingness to experiment, I think that's really a role of the communication leader to bring into practice. So the situation is that not many organizations want to risk it. So it is left to the internal comms leader to take ownership, to see the worth, the worth of employees participating in the communication process. And there are simple things they can do, like giving early feedback before you launch a large-scale campaign. There's nothing stopping you from bouncing off the ideas with a few trusted employees who can give you feedback, and then you can catch a lot of errors. Or in the creation of campaigns, for example, co-creating or giving full ownership of, say, an article or a podcast or a citizen journalist kind of a model that you can do in the organization, or even in the delivery of the content. So allowing them to host a show or blog or take over a channel. And so there are multiple ways. So as the depth of involvement gets bigger, I mean, there obviously the risks are higher, but then the rewards are also there. So it could be developing the narrative of the organization. They could give inputs. You could redraft messages. You could even look at them as employee advocates, ambassadors of the organization by training them. So I believe there is a whole lot of potential to involve employees, take them along the journey. This also requires a lot of maturity from the internal communication leader to be open to this, test out and experiment some of this before they can broad base it across the organization. I hope this gives you a gist of what I mean by inclusive internal comms.
Oh, I think there are some such amazing insights coming out of this podcast, and so I think we'll have to do other ones more again. It's like with every aspect you touch, I think there's so much of depth in you, and there's so much of insight that you carry that probably I think even every question can be a topic in itself. But yeah, so since we are covering overall right now, and I didn't also know how this podcast will go, so I gave a lot of questions to you. But yes, I think I'll come back to you and request for more, depending on what the feedback is. And of course, that I think people need to learn all this. So keeping in mind itself right now, I have another question, like with people itself. And again, I come back to the whole flux that is going around in the world. Now, actually, more about people. Now, this question actually I again put up from the employee's perspective. That there's so much going around in the world. It is affecting societies as well. Employees are part of the society, they make the society, and that same people also then make the organizations. Now, there is confusion all around in the corporate world. How to which tech to use, which all those things, all those new and this connectivity aspects that people are getting connected like never before. The companies are going, there's a shift happening in the economic balance also somewhere. This actually is leading to people also figuring out what's next for them, in terms of there are more opportunities, but there are layoffs also. There are upskilling at the same time. There is AI also. So there are many things that actually today's employees are working with, and there's a confusion. How do you see internal comms playing a role in helping reducing this confusion for any organization, for people? Why? Because confusion eats into productivity.
Right.
Non-clarity eats into productivity. So how do you think we can play the role? So about the role, about the company we can talk about, but how do you put the context of what is happening in the world? What is
Right.
the role of internal comms there, between IC and between organization and people?
Got it. No, I think it's a great question, and let me kind of reflect on it differently. So you kind of set some of the context, but we also need to understand in today's world, there is, employees are seen as an amalgamation of personal brands inside the organization. So they have their own, so especially now with the gig economy, many of the employees they hold multiple jobs. Is not just one job. And I know in India, moonlighting is not encouraged, but unfortunately, because of the cost of living and all of that, they still need to sustain their families and their lives. So that's one one aspect which we see. There are other cultural nuances at play. So, for example, in the Western world, people prefer to avoid mixing personal and professional work, and there is a life outside of work, and they prefer it that way. And research has shown that it adds to better well-being, improved productivity, and all of it. So, most recently, even in Australia, there's an example of a right to disconnect law which has come into play, which means that they allows employees to avoid taking calls from work after a certain point in a work week. And I know in India, there may be lesser differences, but they're a lot more pronounced now because how business leaders have gone about stating in public that employees are slacking at the workplace, they need to do 80 hours per week. And so all of that, some of these references, make it harder in India. And also hierarchy is respected. Leadership wants employee to stay back in the office and do more work. Most of them do it reluctantly, and it doesn't really add much to their productivity, but it really impacts their mental health and personal lives. And we've also seen a recent case, with the employed EY. So there have been a lot of repercussions of some of these aspects. So I think here the role of the internal communicator is to really be able to take a stand and change the approach and policy and perception that's out there and help communicate it. And again, this is partnering with the HR leader. It could be with the business leader. And this is really not about saying we believe in work-life balance, because sometimes this can come across as pretty fake. But it needs to be, they need to bring out those stories of how it's really put in practice, because people will only see the action and believe it and not really look at some of the words that is put up on the website or in the reception area. So I think that's fundamentally what I believe it is.
You spoke about stories, and you also spoke about in one of your blogs or podcasts that you are a great advocate of crowdsourcing employee stories. The idea seems simple, but what do you think is keeping organizations back or like not taking it up or exploring this option?
I think the fundamental issue would be the fact that not many communicators probably know what storytelling is. They also need a lot of help and handholding to uh, to to learn storytelling in the real form and then bring that into practice. The second is when you are also trying to involve employees, you need to have built sufficient credibility and influence inside the organization to be able to then ask people for content. And many people are hesitant to share content because of how it will be perceived, either by the manager or by the organization, or even from a personal standpoint. Some of them are not comfortable with sharing content. So it's a lot to do with being trained and coached on how storytelling is done, giving employees the autonomy and leverage to be able to share content and also see that as a way of getting visibility inside the organization or getting recognized inside the organization and even outside. So it's a lot to do with how this is explained, and therefore the narrative of how the internal communicator goes out and talks about this will change how storytelling is done and how crowdsourced content can be generated.
And I think it's time that actually that these initiatives are picked up. Another most important learning I took from you is educate them. As you said, there could be hesitance in would I be able to create great content? Would people judge me, or how will I look like, or what will I write? I think which means then we need to educate. They need to educate people to address these ideas and thoughts. So coming again back to people, there is, and just adding a little more, as you rightly said, that there is some that you have a right to disconnect law in Australia, and there are certain places the work week is being lessened. Like I think one of the countries in Norway or somewhere, The one of the countries has reduced the work week by 1 day.
Correct. Yeah.
So with all this coming into picture, and on the other hand, the other countries have different ways, different cultural laws, workplace laws. There is still there is overall a trust deficit creeping in all walks of life.
Mhm.
There is reluctance in people to trust each other. And what does it mean for IC and HR professionals in strengthening and building the culture?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think overall, trust as a subject has been, in the attention frame for leaders and organizations for many years. And if you've been, following the Edelman Trust Barometer, it has clearly shown that over the years, trust has eroded. So we to begin with, I think we need to know why trust has eroded over the years. So leaders, for example, haven't walked the talk. Managers haven't treated employees and their team members consistently. Organizations haven't made the effort to connect often and transparently with their employees during good times and in bad times. And there are numerous cases where layoffs are done without consultations, without prior notice, poor messaging leading to distrust in the system, because some will say, I don't know why this layoff is happening. Someone has told me to convey this to you. So these kind of messages create a lot of dissonance in the system. About that, of course, COVID has also made people realize that they have made some of their options, very clearly. So some prefer to work remotely. They have seen the benefits of working from home, and many of them hold multiple jobs to manage through the cost of living crisis sweeping the world. Then there's the gig economy, like I mentioned, which has grown significantly. People are becoming more independent. Organizations are turning to contracting more often because they want to reduce the risks, dependencies, overheads. So all this means that culture has really shifted in the organizations. People don't stay long within organizations. They can easily associate themselves with multiple brands, and also believe that all, like I said, organizations are an amalgamation of personal brands. Every one of the
Yeah,
employees is a personal brand, and they have their own way of looking at the world. So everyone brings their expertise to the workplace, they get the job done, and they move on. So there is less connection, there's less camaraderie, there's less communication, focus which can be established. And I think those are fundamentally the issues. So it's important to call out that while engaging employees is not an internal communications role, and I think sometimes internal communicators get caught in this game of saying, engagement sits with internal comms, which is not true. Engagement is everyone's responsibility.
yeah,
So, for example, when an employee joins an organization, if you see the job description, they will clearly say, if you are a self-motivated person, please apply for the job. Now, you after you join, it doesn't become somebody else's responsibility to keep yourself motivated. It's a individual's responsibility to be motivated enough to do the job. So the internal communications role is, how engagement can be influenced, but it cannot really own it, and the ownership really rests with the entire organization. And sometimes there's also a debate between, are we really focusing on the right things? Because employee engagement has a lot of factors. Which factors really are you looking at? So likewise, culture is shaped by how leaders, managers, stakeholders behave with each other. And again, that is how the culture is shaped both within and outside. And when they do it with respect, when it's values led, that's when the culture is shaped. So internal communications can really influence it. They don't own the culture, but they can definitely shape it or communicate it. And so strengthening it through internal communication mean understanding what the narrative is, giving leaders the opportunity to stand in front of employees, talk to them, explain themselves, being transparent in the responses, and also being able to get back to employees and say sometimes that I don't have all the answers, and I will get back to you when it's
yeah.
appropriate. But just being honest and transparent is really what employees want, and that leads to a lot more trust.
I think superb. I think uh, this idea and point that it does not sit with us. It does not engagement not sitting with us, but everybody's job. Again, I think also this idea needs to be percolated down and hammered consistently all across levels in the company so that
Exactly.
people can understand it's not the one person's job, it's everybody's and everyday's job. So coming on to so now shifting our focus a little bit from organizations to people, especially IC professionals. First, so first thing is, what do you think communications, I think we have covered it, but if you want to add something here, what do you think communication professionals can do to make company future ready?
Yeah, I think we touched upon this topic, but let me begin by saying that they need to upskill themselves regularly, and especially now with AI and machine learning coming into play, there is a need to be aware of what these technologies are and be able to use it, and able to train others to use it effectively. So unless communicators are familiar and know how to use it, no one is going to respect them or trust them, especially leaders. They need to also show that they are ahead of the game by taking up initiatives on, say, digital literacy and transformation for the business. They can invest in training others on communication skills and capabilities. And they also need to keep themselves abreast of the macro environment and support leaders with a point of view on topics that matter. So, suppose there is a social unrest happening in the country or in the city, then the leader needs to have a point of view, because it's not that something's happening outside is not affecting employees. It is definitely affecting them, and they need to be able to articulate that. So that's really how they can help companies become future ready.
Yes, it's like what is it's like what you have mentioned is something very simple. In some of the things are very simple, but at the same time they're so profound. It's like and they're very human. Like if there's something happening around you, how do you perceive it? It's like also having the also kind of ensuring that the competence of yours is always there, and you are also upskilling and learning and kind of enabling everybody around you. Some very basics, but at the same time very important. I think that's where we're all missing on. First, and it's our responsibility to kind of push it up across. Now, something about what makes for a good IC professional.
So the way I see it, there are certain strengths which IC professionals should have, but I think the clear way to gauge what makes a good IC professional is that they must have a clear purpose of why they must be part of the function, and that is fundamental to. So it's not like I just joined this function because this was the only job available. So that is not going to help you establish yourself within the organization. So the curiosity to learn, to get stronger with their domain, the willingness to invest in their own development. They need to be resilient and self-motivated. So they need to have core technical skills. So you can't be in this function without being really strong with writing, program management, stakeholder management, storytelling. So these are fundamentals, and these are fundamental core technical skills. Then they also need to be smart with driving and leading change initiatives. So I see every internal communicator as a change agent, or I would say internal communications is really change management in that sense. They would need to probably get certified in change and other professional qualifications, which will help them get better. The willingness to listen, learn from all levels. So it's not that you can't learn from juniors or you can't learn from your peers. Everyone can definitely contribute to your development. And lastly, I would say the willingness to work hands-on in the trenches, appreciate the culture of the organization better. So those are some of the fundamentals of what would make a good internal communication professional.
Now, the last question of the day today for you, Aniisu, and I'm so excited to actually just ask more and more from you, because I'm learning as I'm doing this podcast, and I'm brushing up my own set of thoughts, and again the beliefs also. So I'm asking this question to you, and it's very much relevant to me right now as well. What are the beliefs that IC people need to shatter?
I think the fact that the role and the function is irreplaceable. So that is fundamentally what we need to reinforce within the organization. In the past, no one could imagine that there would be a function like internal communication until a few decades ago. And it can evolve and change depending on the business environment and how communicators must be prepared for it. But broadly, the function is going to be there and it's going to get stronger. The fact that people also see value in the function on their own, the IC function will need to do a lot more reach outs and demonstrate value for stakeholders to change the perception. So I think one of the beliefs that we need to definitely shatter is the perception about internal communicators and the function. So that's something which needs to be done. The third is, internal communication function as a cost center. It's a business enabler, and that it can only happen that the professionals invest in becoming experts. So the change will only happen when we become known to be experts in the space, and leaders are not telling us what to do, and they are listening to what we tell them, and they are valuing our inputs. That's when we will see a fundamental shift in this particular aspect. Also, the fact that internal communication only focuses on what's within, that's not really true. So we need to change the perception that we only can influence what's inside, but that's not true, because in today's world, we see that the boundaries between internal and external have blurred so much, and therefore this will need to change. So it's not also only about the team, it's mainly about employees, and involving them in the process through inclusive communications, like I mentioned, is the way forward. So when you see employees as partners and not just an audience, that's when we will see transformation, and that's when the beliefs will also change.
True. I think there are few elements if you start to see, then actually the entire scope or the way see the world will change actually. So thank you, Aniisu. Thank you for such an lovely session and amazing insights. I'm totally going to relook at it again, actually, to learn myself what all we discussed and learn from there. Definitely taking to my team as well to say, hey, such an amazing podcast. So yes, if you all want to stay in touch with Aniisu, you can subscribe to his LinkedIn newsletter. Every week, he dives into insights that can help you shine, both at work and in life. And also you can visit his website. That's www.intrascope.com and www.aniisu.com. Aniisu is with double I. And you keep in touch and to know more what he does. So thank you, Aniisu. Looking forward to more conversations and many such conversations like this.
Thank you so much, Ambuj. It's a pleasure talking to you, and it's a great conversation I had. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Looking forward to more.